Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are going to be doing a retrospective review of 3:10 to Yuma, the 2007 film, not the original from 1957. I am a lifelong fan of westerns, so this one should be very fun for me. So the question that I will be asking and answering throughout this retrospective is this a good western or is it simply a product of its time? So the overall breakdown of this retrospective is we're going to take a look at the creative team's credentials first, then we're going to go into a character analysis, followed by a basic plot breakdown, then I'm going to delve deeper into the positives and the negatives of the movie, and then finally ending with my personal review score, obviously on a 1 to 10 point scale. So without further ado, let's get right into today's retrospective. So first things first, we're going to look at the creative team's credentials. So this movie was directed by James Mangold, who also did Copland, Girl Interrupted, and Walk the Line before this. I generally enjoyed James Mangold's work. I did like Copland and Walk the Line. I will admit I have not seen Girl Interrupted. I also think he did a really good job with the X-Men Wolverine movies that he did, which was both the Wolverine and Logan. The writers of this movie are Michael Brandt and Derek Haas, who wrote Too Fast, Too Furious and Catch That Kid. I'm not the biggest fan of Too Fast, Too Furious. I think that movie is one of the weakest links in that series. But I did like Catch That Kid when I was younger. Granted, I haven't seen that movie in probably 15 years now. And something I just found out before recording this retrospective is that they also wrote the movie Wanted with James McAvoy and Angelina Jolie. That movie I did enjoy. One last thing I feel that I need to mention is that 3:10 to Yuma was inspired by a short story written by Elmore Leonard of the same name and published back in 1953. According to the wikis, the short story was used as a springboard for the movies. So basically the short story, it was just the outlaw and the gunslinger sitting in the hotel room discussing their motivations while they await for the 3:10 to Yuma. So with the creative team out of the way, now we're actually going to get into the actor-character analysis. So, starting things off with Christian Bale as Dan Evans. Dan Evans is our hero of the story. Basically, he's an indebted rancher turned Pinkerton to one job to save the ranch. So in a nutshell, Dan Evans doesn't really care that he's, bringing justice. He's just in it for the money. Then we've got Russell Crowe as Ben Wade, who is obviously our primary villain throughout the movie. He was the outlaw that got captured and is being escorted to the 3:10 to Yuma train. I don't really have a whole lot to say on Ben Wade because there's not really a whole lot of character development that went on during this movie. Because this movie is so plot-driven, there's just not enough time to really flush out these characters like a traditional Western would. Then we get into Peter Fonda as Byron, who is the oldest Pinkerton of the group that's basically been chasing Ben Wade for quite some time. He gets shot by Ben Wade's gang in the beginning. My biggest problem with Byron as a character is that they had to show that he was just as bad as Ben Wade because the Pinkertons just have no chemistry or character development during this movie. So basically, what did they do with Byron? Well, he apparently slaughtered a bunch of Native American Indians, so that justified, Ben Wade killing him off, and now Ben Wade basically becomes the hero. Then we transition into Alan Tudyk as Doc Potter, who is probably my favorite character of the movie, largely because he has the charisma of Alan Tudyk behind him. Even though he's a side character, he does get a heroic moment toward the end where the Pinkertons had to break out Ben Wade from a Chinese slave labor camp by instigating the fight that led to the escape. Spoiler alert, he does die in this movie, but I was actually quite sad to see him die, largely because he was the comic relief to Dan Evans and Ben Wade. You could have written out the two Pinkertons, Byron and Butterfield, and nothing would have changed. Speaking of Butterfield, we had Dallas Roberts as Butterfield, who is a Pinkerton with financial stake in the railroad that Ben Wade and his gang have been robbing for who knows how long. The problem with him is he's a totally bland character. Other than having a financial stake in the railroad, that's all he really has. He pretty much does nothing for the movie. So, and just like I said, you could write him out, absolutely nothing would change. And then the final character I want to talk about is Logan Lerman as William. That was Dan Evans' son. he was okay, kind of, the archetype of the boy coming into manhood. The problem with him is they rely on him way too heavily towards the end, especially during that last gunfight, and even when they get into the Apache territory. But I will expand on those in just a couple of minutes. So now we get into the story/plot breakdown of the movie, and this movie has a very simple story/plot that goes along with it. Basically, this movie follows Dan Evans, who is a cattle rancher that has fallen into debt because of a drought, getting wrapped up in escorting Ben Wade, the notorious gang leader, to the town of Contention to board the 310 to Yuma with the Pinkertons. And along the way, they run into problems with Ben Wade killing a couple of the Pinkertons, to being attacked by Apaches, and ultimately Ben Wade's gang coming to Contention with the intent to free him from captivity. Now that we got the basic plot breakdown out of the way, let's transition into what the positives are for this movie. A positive to this movie is that this is very plot-driven. The movie is always about go, go, go. So as a result, there's never really a dull moment in the movie. It's very well paced for a modern audience. And that transitions into the characters of Dan Evans and Ben Wade. They are written very well for a solely plot-driven movie. All of the shootouts were very eventful. None were really too long. None were really too short. And the last positive that I have to say is regarding the ending, where Dan's son, William, could have killed Ben Wade, but overall didn't, which was very well executed. It was the same on the other side. Ben Wade could have killed William, but also chose not to. Now we get into the fun stuff for me, which is all of the negatives that this movie has, which, in my opinion, there are quite a few. The first big one for me is this is just far too modernized. It's not Western enough, in my opinion, because it feels more like a roller coaster ride. When I watch a Western, I want it to be a slow burner. That way all of the action scenes have much more of an impact on not only the story, but the characters as well. So with that, there's clearly not a lot of character development as a result of being just a go, go, go movie. There are campfire scenes which were supposed to act as character development, but were just way too short and felt like the writers did just enough to keep the audience interested in the characters. So I mentioned this with my character analysis that I had a problem with the Apache territory with regards to William. So with that out of the way, there were two major plot conveniences in this movie. The first is William showing up when Ben Wade tries to escape the first time in the Apache territory. Now, up to this point, they show that William is at least a day behind Dan Evans and the rest of the Pinkertons. So him showing up in the Apache territory the second Ben Wade, kills Byron and takes a shotgun and tries to escape, is written more off as a plot convenience because they don't actually show him, not only trailing them, but being just slightly behind him. Had they actually done that, it wouldn't have come across as a plot convenience. And I mentioned that there's two of them. The second plot convenience is actually right after the Apache territory, and it's that Ben Wade does successfully escape during the middle of the night, but he lands in the Chinese slave labor camp and gets captured. The way that this is a major plot convenience is that Dan Evans and the Pinkertons just happen to know exactly where he went so that they could help him escape from captivity so that they can get him back to Contention to collect the money. So I know that I'm jumping all over the place with this, but one last thing I just thought of was the way that the Apache shootout was shot. At one point in the movie, Dan Evans, Ben Wade, and the Pinkertons are ambushed by the Apaches, obviously being in the Apache territory, and they attack them at night. The problem with this sequence is that it was way too dark. The Pinkertons couldn't see the Apaches, but the Apaches could apparently see them, probably just by the campfire. But Ben Wade just happened to know where the Apaches wouldn't see him, and him trying to flank them. The Apaches primarily stayed in one spot up on the hill instead of trying to move down. So for me, that was just kind of an easy mode kill. not really all that eventful. And finally, my last major gripe with this movie is the final gunfight and contention with Ben Wade's gang and Dan Evans. It's not as impactful because Ben Wade and Dan Evans are not expanded upon before this point. Like I said, the original short story was just the characters in the hotel room discussing their motivations to one another. That was not in this movie. They did that while the bullets were flying by their heads. Had Dan admitted that he was a deserter and wanted to be the hero before the shootout, it would have been better. Then have Ben agree and have him tell Dan that he's escaped from the Yuma prison twice before. So, okay, Dan, I'll go along with this because the chances are very high. I'm going to break out of this prison a third time anyway. Sure, get me to the train. You be the hero for the day. Your 15 minutes of fame. We're done. Yeah, the problem is that all goes out the window because, now it comes up as just this is now a convenience because he only told him this near death. So then Dan gets Ben to the train. So once Dan dies and Ben shoots his gang, that would have had much more of an impact had all the motivations been said in the hotel room, because Ben would have been all about Dan getting that 15 minutes of fame. So to me, this is definitely a product of Save the Cat. For those of you that don't know what Save the Cat is, it was a book written in the early to mid 2000s by Blake Snyder, who is a Hollywood screenwriter, and it's basically used as a template for all screenplays that are being written today, even though it clearly says in the book that this is not supposed to be the definitive blueprint of all screenplays going forward. It was a tool to help beginning screenwriters, but now the Hollywood system has just over-abused it. So with all of that out of the way, it's time to give my personal review score on this movie. So I personally give this movie a 7 out of 10. This is definitely a good toe dipper into the Western genre, but as a Western, it doesn't work. Actually, let me rephrase that. As a lifelong fan of Westerns, it doesn't work for me. I personally would have wanted a slower burn to get to know the characters of Dan Evans and Ben Wade better. This was just a summer blockbuster set in the Old West, to me. This movie had a lot of potential with Christian Bale and Russell Crowe as the titular characters. But I'll end it with this. If you want to start watching Westerns, this is a good starting point. I usually recommend this movie to my friends if they want to start watching Westerns because it is very beginner-friendly, unlike movies like Once Upon a Time in the West or Unforgiven or even The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Hey guys, if you liked what you just listened to, then please like and share this across all social media platforms, and subscribe to the channel while you're at it, whether that's on YouTube, BitChute, Dailymotion, etc. Make sure to follow MetrObelisk Radio at the social media links in the description, that way you can stay up to date when the newest episodes go up. If you have any topic suggestion for MetrObelisk Radio to cover, then please leave them in the comments. If I use your suggestion for a future episode, I will give you a shout out during that particular episode. With all of that said, have a great day, and I will see you guys next week.